How the CIA Made Google INSURGE Intelligence, a new crowd-funded investigative journalism project, breaks the exclusive story of how the United States intelligence community funded, nurtured and incubated Google, as part of a drive to dominate the world through control of information. Seed-funded by the NSA and CIA, Google was merely the first among a plethora of private sector startups co-opted by US intelligence to retain information superiority. The origins of this ingenious strategy trace back to a secret Pentagon-sponsored group that for the last 2 decades has functioned as a bridge between the US government and elites across the business, industry, finance, corporate, and media sectors. The group has allowed some of the most powerful special interests in corporate America to systematically circumvent democratic accountability and the rule of law, to influence government policies, as well as public opinion in the US and around the world. The results have been catastrophic: NSA mass surveillance, a permanent state of global war, and a new initiative to transform the US military into skinnet. This exclusive is being released for free in the public interest, and was enabled by crowdfunding. I'd like to thank my amazing community of patrons for their support, which gave me the opportunity to work on this in-depth investigation. Please support independent, investigative journalism for the global commons. In the wake of the Charlie Hebdo attacks in Paris, Western governments are moving fast to legitimize expanded powers of mass surveillance and controls on the Internet, all in the name of fighting terrorism. US and European politicians have called to protect NSA-style snooping, and to advance the capacity to intrude on Internet privacy by outlawing encryption. One idea is to establish a telecoms partnership that would unilaterally delete content deemed to fuel hatred and violence in situations considered appropriate. Heated discussions are going on at government and parliamentary level to explore cracking down on lawyer-client confidentiality. What any of this would have done to prevent the Charlie Hebdo attacks remains a mystery, especially given that we already know the terrorists were on the radar of French intelligence for up to a decade. There's little new in this story. The 9/11 atrocity was the first of many terrorist attacks, each succeeded by the dramatic extension of draconian state powers at the expense of civil liberties, backed up with the projection of military force in regions identified as hotspots harboring terrorists. Yet there's little indication that this tried and tested formula has done anything to reduce the danger. If anything, we appear to be locked into a deepening cycle of violence with no clear end in sight. As our governments push to increase their powers, INSURGE intelligence can now reveal the vast extent to which the US intelligence community is implicated in nurturing the web platforms we know today, for the precise purpose of utilizing the technology as a mechanism to fight global information war, to legitimize the power of the few over the rest of us. The linchpin of this story is the corporation that in many ways defines the 21st century with its unobtrusive omnipresence, Google. Google styles itself as a friendly, funky, user-friendly tech firm that rose to prominence through a combination of skill, luck, and genuine innovation. This is true. But it is a mere fragment of the story. In reality, Google is a smokescreen behind which lurks the US military-industrial complex. The inside story of Google's rise, revealed here for the first time, opens a can of worms that goes far beyond Google, unexpectedly shining a light on the existence of a parasitical network driving the evolution of the US national security apparatus, and profiting obscenely from its operation. The shadow network. For the last 2 decades, US foreign and intelligence strategies have resulted in a global war on terror, consisting of prolonged military invasions in the Muslim world and comprehensive surveillance of civilian populations. These strategies have been incubated, if not dictated, by a secret network inside and beyond the Pentagon. Established under the Clinton administration, consolidated under Bush, and firmly entrenched under Obama, this bipartisan network of mostly neoconservative ideologues sealed its dominion inside the US Department of Defense study by the dawn of 2015, through the operation of an obscure corporate entity outside the Pentagon, but run by the Pentagon. In 1999, the CIA created its own venture capital investment firm, FARMINGTON, to fund promising startups that might create technologies useful for intelligence agencies. But the inspiration for FARMINGTON came earlier, when the Pentagon set up its own private sector outfit, known as the Highlands Forum. This private network has operated as a bridge between the Pentagon and powerful American elites outside the military since the mid-1990s. Despite changes in civilian administrations, the network around the Highlands Forum has become increasingly successful in dominating U.S. defense policy. Giant defense contractors like Booz Allen Hamilton and Science Applications International Corporation are sometimes referred to as the shadow intelligence community, due to the revolving doors between them and government, and their capacity to simultaneously influence and profit from defense policy. But while these contractors compete for power and money, they also collaborate where it counts. The Highlands Forum has for 20 years provided an off-the-record space for some of the most prominent members of the shadow intelligence community to convene with senior U.S. government officials, alongside other leaders in relevant industries. I first stumbled upon the existence of this network in November 2014, when I reported for Vice's Motherboard that U.S. Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel's newly announced Defense Innovation Initiative was really about building Skynet or something like it, essentially to dominate an emerging era of automated robotic warfare. That story was based on a little-known Pentagon-funded white paper, published 2 months earlier by the National Defense University NDU in Washington, D.C., a leading U.S. military-run institution that, among other things, generates research to develop U.S. defense policy at the highest levels. The white paper clarified the thinking behind the new initiative, and the revolutionary scientific and technological developments it hoped to capitalize on. The Highlands Forum. The co-author of that NDU white paper is Linton Wells, a 51-year veteran U.S. defense official, who served in the Bush administration as the Pentagon's Chief Information Officer, overseeing the National Security Agency (NSA) and other spy agencies. He still holds active top-secret security clearances, and according to a report by Government Executive magazine in 2006, he chaired the Highlands Forum, founded by the Pentagon in 1994. New Scientist magazine Paywall has compared the Highlands Forum to elite meetings like Davos, Deitchley and Aspen, describing it as far less well-known, yet arguably just as influential a talking shop. Regular forum meetings bring together innovative people to consider interactions between policy and technology. Its biggest successes have been in the development of high-tech network-based warfare. Given Wells' role in such a forum, perhaps it was not surprising that his defense transformation white paper was able to have such a profound impact on actual Pentagon policy. But if that was the case, why had no one noticed? Despite being sponsored by the Pentagon, I could find no official page on the DoD website about the forum. Active and former U.S. military and intelligence sources had never heard of it, and neither did national security journalists. I was baffled. The Pentagon's intellectual capital venture firm, in the prologue to his 2007 book, A Crowd of One, The Future of Individual Identity, John Klippinger, an MIT scientist of the Media Lab Human Dynamics Group, described how he participated in a Highlands Forum gathering, an invitation-only meeting funded by the Department of Defense and chaired by the Assistant for Networks and Information Integration. This was a senior DoD post overseeing operations and policies for the Pentagon's most powerful spy agencies, including the NSA, the Defense Intelligence Agency (DIA), among others. Starting from 2003, the position was transitioned into what is now the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence. The Highlands Forum, Klippinger wrote, was founded by a retired U.S. Navy captain named Dick O'Neill. Delegates include senior U.S. military officials across numerous agencies and divisions, captains, rear admirals, generals, colonels, majors and commanders. as well as members of the DoD leadership. What at first appeared to be the forum's main website describes Highlands as an informal cross-disciplinary network sponsored by federal government, focusing on information, science and technology. Explanation is sparse, beyond a single Department of Defense logo. But Highlands also has another website describing itself as an intellectual capital venture firm with extensive experience assisting corporations, organizations, and government leaders. The firm provides a wide range of services, including strategic planning, scenario creation and gaming for expanding global markets, as well as working with clients to build strategies for execution. The Highlands Group Incorporated, the website says, organizes a whole range of forums on these issues. For instance, in addition to the Highlands Forum, since 9/11 the group runs the Island Forum, an international event held in association with Singapore's Ministry of Defense, which O'Neill oversees as lead consultant. The Singapore Ministry of Defense website describes the Island Forum as patterned after the Highlands Forum organized for the US Department of Defense. Documents leaked by NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden confirmed that Singapore played a key role in permitting the US and Australia to tap undersea cables to spy on Asian powers like Indonesia and Malaysia. The Highlands Group website also reveals that Highlands is partnered with one of the most powerful defense contractors in the United States. Highlands is supported by a network of companies and independent researchers, including our Highlands Forum partners for the past 10 years at SAIC, and the vast Highlands network of participants in the Highlands Forum. SAIC stands for the US defense firm, Science Applications International Corporation, which changed its name to Leidos in 2013, operating SAIC as a subsidiary. SAIC Leidos is among the top 10 largest defense contractors in the US, and works closely with the US intelligence community, especially the NSA. According to investigative journalist Tim Shorrock, the first to disclose the vast extent of the privatization of US intelligence with his seminal book Spies for Hire, SAIC has a symbiotic relationship with the NSA. The agency is the company's largest single customer and SAIC is the NSA's largest contractor. The full name of Captain Dick O'Neill, the founding president of the Highlands Forum, is Richard Patrick O'Neill, who after his work in the Navy joined the DoD. He served his last post as Deputy for Strategy and Policy in the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Defense for Command, Control, Communications and Intelligence, before setting up Highlands. The Club of Yoda but Clippinger also referred to another mysterious individual revered by forum attendees. He sat at the back of the room, expressionless behind thick, black-rimmed glasses. I never heard him utter a word. Andrew Andy Marshall is an icon within DoD. Some call him Yoda, indicative of his mythical inscrutable status. He had served many administrations, and was widely regarded as above partisan politics. He was a supporter of the Highlands Forum and a regular fixture from its beginning. Since 1973, Marshall has headed up one of the Pentagon's most powerful agencies, the Office of Net Assessment ANA, the US Defense Secretary's internal think tank, which conducts highly classified research on future planning for defense policy across the US military and intelligence community. The ANA has played a key role in major Pentagon strategy initiatives, including Maritime Strategy, the Strategic Defense Initiative, the Competitive Strategies Initiative, and the Revolution in Military Affairs. In a rare 2002 profile in Wired, reporter Douglas McRae described Andrew Marshall, now 93 years old, as the DoD's most elusive, but one of its most influential officials. McRae added that Vice President Dick Cheney, Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, and Deputy Secretary Paul Wolfowitz, widely considered the hawks of the neoconservative movement in American politics, were among Marshall's star proteges. Speaking at a low-key Harvard University seminar a few months after 9/11, Highlands Forum founding president Richard O'Neill said that Marshall was much more than a regular fixture at the forum. Andy Marshall is our co-chair, so indirectly everything that we do goes back into Andy's system. He told the audience. Directly, people who are in the forum meetings may be going back to give briefings to Andy on a variety of topics and to synthesize things. He also said that the forum had a third co-chair, the director of the Defense Advanced Research and Projects Agency DARPA, which at that time was a Rumsfeld appointee, Anthony J. Tether. Before joining DARPA, Tether was vice president of SAIC's Advanced Technology Sector. The Highlands Forum's influence on US defense policy has thus operated through three main channels: its sponsorship by the Office of the Secretary of Defense around the middle of last decade. This was transitioned specifically to the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, which is in charge of the main surveillance agencies, its direct link to Andrew Yoda, Marshall S.N.A., and its direct link to DARPA. According to Klippinger, in a crowd of one, what happens at informal gatherings, such as the Highlands Forum, could, over time and through unforeseen curious paths of influence, have enormous impact, not just within the DoD but throughout the world. He wrote that the forum's ideas have moved from being heretical to mainstream. Ideas that were anathema in 1999 had been adopted as policy just 3 years later. Although the forum does not produce consensus recommendations, its impact is deeper than a traditional government advisory committee. The ideas that emerge from meetings are available for use by decision makers as well as by people from the think tanks. According to O'Neill, we'll include people from BOOS, SAIC, RAND, or others at our meetings. We welcome that kind of cooperation because, truthfully, they have the gravitas. They are there for the long haul and are able to influence government policies with real scholarly work. We produce ideas and interaction and networks for these people to take and use as they need them. My repeated requests to O'Neill for information on his work at the Highlands Forum were ignored. The Department of Defense also did not respond to multiple requests for information and comment on the forum. Information warfare. The Highlands Forum has served as a two-way influence bridge, on the one hand, for the shadow network of private contractors, to influence the formulation of information operations policy across US military intelligence, and on the other, for the Pentagon to influence what is going on in the private sector. There is no clearer evidence of this than the truly instrumental role of the forum in incubating the idea of mass surveillance as a mechanism to dominate information on a global scale. In 1989, Richard O'Neill, then US Navy cryptologist, wrote a paper for the US Naval War College toward a methodology for perception management. In his book, Future Wars, Colonel John Alexander, then a senior officer in the US Army's Intelligence and Security Command INSCOM, records that O'Neill's paper for the first time outlined a strategy for perception management. As part of information warfare IW, O'Neill's proposed strategy identified 3 categories of targets for IW: adversaries, so they believe they are vulnerable; potential partners, so they perceive the cause of war as just; and finally, civilian populations and the political leadership, so they perceive the cost as worth the effort. A secret briefing based on O'Neill's work made its way to the top leadership at DoD. They acknowledged that O'Neill was right and told him to bury it. Except the DoD didn't bury it. Around 1994, the Highlands Group was founded by O'Neill as an official Pentagon project at the appointment of Bill Clinton's then Defense Secretary William Perry, who went on to join SAIC's board of directors after retiring from government in 2003. In O'Neill's own words, the group would function as the Pentagon's Ideas Lab. According to government executive, military and information technology experts gathered at the first forum meeting to consider the impacts of it and globalization on the United States and on warfare. How would the Internet and other emerging technologies change the world? The meeting helped plant the idea of network-centric warfare in the minds of the nation's top military thinkers. Excluding the public official, Pentagon records confirmed that the Highlands Forum's primary goal was to support DoD policies on O'Neill's specialism, information warfare. According to the Pentagon's 1997 annual report to the President and the Congress under a section titled Information Operations, the Office of the Secretary of Defense OSD had authorized the establishment of the Highlands Group of key DoD, industry, and academic experts to coordinate across federal military intelligence agencies. The following year's DoD annual report reiterated the forum's centrality to information operations. To examine issues, DoD sponsors the Highlands Forum, which brings together government, industry, and academic professionals from various fields. Notice that in 1998, the Highlands Group became a forum. According to O'Neill, this was to avoid subjecting Highlands Forum's meetings to bureaucratic restrictions. What he was alluding to was the Federal Advisory Committee Act (FACA), which regulates the way the U.S. government can formally solicit the advice of special interests. Known as the Open Government Law, FACA requires that U.S. government officials cannot hold closed-door or secret consultations with people outside government to develop policy. All such consultations should take place via federal advisory committees that permit public scrutiny. FACA requires that meetings be held in public, announced via the Federal Register, that advisory groups are registered with an office at the General Services Administration, among other requirements intended to maintain accountability to the public interest. But government executive reported that O'Neill and others believed such regulatory issues would quell the free flow of ideas and no-holds-barred discussions they sought. Pentagon lawyers had warned that the word group might necessitate certain obligations, and advised running the whole thing privately. So O'Neill renamed it the Highlands Forum, and moved into the private sector, to manage it as a consultant to the Pentagon. The Pentagon Highlands Forum thus runs under the mantle of O'Neill's intellectual capital venture firm, Highlands Group Incorporated. In 1995, a year after William Perry appointed O'Neill to head up the Highlands Forum, SAIC, the forum's partner organization, launched a new Center for Information Strategy and Policy under the direction of Jeffrey Cooper, a member of the Highlands Group, who advises senior Defense Department officials on information warfare issues. The center had precisely the same objective as the forum, to function as a clearinghouse to bring together the best and brightest minds in information warfare, by sponsoring a continuing series of seminars, papers and symposia, which explore the implications of information warfare in depth. The aim was to enable leaders and policymakers from government, industry, and academia to address key issues surrounding information warfare, to ensure that the United States retains its edge over any and all potential enemies. Despite FACA regulations, federal advisory committees are already heavily influenced, if not captured, by corporate power. So in bypassing FACA, the Pentagon overrode even the loose restrictions of FACA, by permanently excluding any possibility of public engagement. O'Neill's claim that there are no reports or recommendations is disingenuous. By his own admission, the secret Pentagon consultations with industry that have taken place through the Highlands Forum since 1994 have been accompanied by regular presentations of academic and policy papers, recordings and notes of meetings, and other forms of documentation that are locked behind a log and only accessible by forum delegates. This violates the spirit, if not the letter, of FACA in a way that is patently intended to circumvent democratic accountability and the rule of law. The Highlands Forum doesn't need to produce consensus recommendations. Its purpose is to provide the Pentagon a shadow social networking mechanism, to cement lasting relationships with corporate power, and to identify new talent that can be used to fine-tune information warfare strategies in absolute secrecy. Total participants in the DDS Highlands Forum number over 1,000, although sessions largely consist of small closed workshop-style gatherings of maximum 25-30 people, bringing together experts and officials depending on the subject. Delegates have included senior personnel from SAIC and Booz Allen Hamilton, RAND Corporation, Cisco, Human Genome Sciences, eBay, PayPal, IBM, Google, Microsoft, AT&T, the BBC, Disney, General Electric, Enron, among innumerable others, Democrat and Republican members of Congress and the Senate, senior executives from the U.S. energy industry, such as Daniel Yergin of IHS Cambridge Energy Research Associates, and key people involved in both sides of presidential campaigns. Other participants have included senior media professionals, David Ignatius, associate editor of The Washington Post and at the time the executive editor of the International Herald Tribune, Thomas Friedman, longtime New York Times columnist, Arno D. Birchgrave, and editor at Washington Times and United Press International, Stephen Levy, a former Newsweek editor, senior writer for Wired and now chief tech editor at Medium, Lawrence Wright, staff writer at The New Yorker, Noah Shatman, executive editor at The Daily Beast, Rebecca McKinnon, co-founder of Global Voices Online, Nick Gowing of the BBC, and John Markoff of The New York Times. Due to its current sponsorship by the OSDS Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, the forum has inside access to the chiefs of the main US surveillance and reconnaissance agencies, as well as the directors and their assistants of duty research agencies, from DARPA to the ANA. This also means that the forum is deeply plugged into the Pentagon's policy research task forces. Google, seeded by the Pentagon in 1994, the same year the Highlands Forum was founded under the stewardship of the Office of the Secretary of Defense, the ANA, and DARPA. Two young PhD students at Stanford University, Sergey Brin and Larry Page, made their breakthrough on the first automated web crawling and page ranking application. That application remains the core component of what eventually became Google's search service. Brin and Page had performed their work with funding from the Digital Library Initiative (DLI), a multi-agency program of the National Science Foundation (NSF), NASA and DARPA. But that's just one side of the story. Throughout the development of the search engine, Sergey Brin reported regularly and directly to two people who were not Stanford faculty at all, Dr. Bhavani Thrasingham and Dr. Rick Steinheiser. Both were representatives of a sensitive US intelligence community research program on information security and data mining. Thrasingham is currently the Louis A. Beecherle Distinguished Professor and Executive Director of the Cybersecurity Research Institute at the University of Texas, Dallas, and a sought-after expert on data mining, data management and information security issues. But in the 1990s, she worked for the Mitri Corporation, a leading US defense contractor, where she managed the Massive Digital Data Systems Initiative, a project sponsored by the NSA, CIA, and the Director of Central Intelligence, to foster innovative research in information technology. We funded Stanford University through the computer scientist Jeffrey Ullman, who had several promising graduate students working on many exciting areas. Prof. Thrasingham told me. One of them was Sergey Brin, the founder of Google. The Intelligence Community SMDDS program essentially provided Brin seed funding, which was supplemented by many other sources, including the private sector. This sort of funding is certainly not unusual, and Sergey Brin's being able to receive it by being a graduate student at Stanford appears to have been incidental. The Pentagon was all over computer science research at this time. But it illustrates how deeply entrenched the culture of Silicon Valley is in the values of the US intelligence community. In an extraordinary document hosted by the website of the University of Texas, Thrasingham recounts that from 1993 to 1999, the intelligence community IC started a program called Massive Digital Data Systems (MDDS) that I was managing for the intelligence community when I was at the Mitri Corporation. The program funded 15 research efforts at various universities, including Stanford. Its goal was developing data management technologies to manage several terabytes to petabytes of data, including for query processing, transaction management, metadata management, storage management, and data integration. At the time, Thrasingham was Chief Science for Data and Information Management at MITRE, where she led team research and development efforts for the NSA, SEA, US Air Force Research Laboratory, as well as the US Army Space and Naval Warfare Systems Command SPAWAR and Communications and Electronic Command CECOM. She went on to teach courses for US government officials and defense contractors on data mining and counterterrorism. In her University of Texas article, she attaches the copy of an abstract of the US Intelligence Community SMDDS program that had been presented to the Annual Intelligence Community Symposium in 1995. The abstract reveals that the primary sponsors of the MDDS program were three agencies: the NSA, the CIA's Office of Research and Development, and the Intelligence Community's Community Management Staff CMS, which operates under the Director of Central Intelligence. Administrators of the program, which provided funding of around $3-4 million per year for 3-4 years, were identified as Hal Curran NSA, Robert Klutz CMS, Dr. Claudia Pierce NSA, Dr. Rick Steinheiser Ord standing for the CIA's Office of Research and Development, and Dr. Thrasingham herself. Thrasingham goes on in her article to reiterate that this joint CIA-NSA program partly funded Sergey Brin to develop the core of Google through a grant to Stanford managed by Brin's supervisor Prof. Jeffrey D. Ullman. In fact, the Google founder Mr. Sergey Brin was partly funded by this program, while he was a PhD student at Stanford. He, together with his advisor Prof. Jeffrey Ullman and my colleague at MITRE, Dr. Chris Clifton, MITRE's chief science in it, developed the Query Flux system, which produced solutions for mining large amounts of data stored in databases. I remember visiting Stanford with Dr. Rick Steinheiser from the intelligence community, and Mr. Brin would rush in on rollerblades, give his presentation and rush out. In fact, the last time we met in September 1998, Mr. Brin demonstrated to us his search engine, which became Google soon after. Brin and Page officially incorporated Google as a company in September 1998, the very month they last reported to Thrasingham and Steinheiser. Query Flux was also part of Google's patented PageRank search system, which Brin developed at Stanford under the CIA-NSA MDDS program, as well as with funding from the NSF, IBM and Hitachi. That year, MITRE's Dr. Chris Clifton, who worked under Thrasingham to develop the Query Flux system, co-authored a paper with Brin's supervisor, Prof. Ullman, and the CIA's Rick Steinheiser, titled Knowledge Discovery in Text. The paper was presented at an academic conference. The MDDS funding that supported Brin was significant as far as seed funding goes, but it was probably outweighed by the other funding streams, said Thrasingham. The duration of Brin's funding was around 2 years or so. In that period, I and my colleagues from the MDDS would visit Stanford to see Brin, and monitor his progress every 3 months or so. We didn't supervise exactly, but we did want to check progress, point out potential problems and suggest ideas. In those briefings, Brin did present to us on the Query Flux research, and also demonstrated to us versions of the Google search engine. Brin thus reported to Thrasingham and Steinheiser regularly about his work developing Google. Update 2.05 p.m. GMT 2nd February 2015. Since publication of this article, Prof. Thrasingham has amended her article referenced above. The amended version includes a new modified statement, followed by a copy of the original version of her account of the MDDS. In this amended version, Thrasingham rejects the idea that CIA funded Google, and says instead, In fact, Prof. Jeffrey Ullman at Stanford and my colleague at MITRE Dr. Chris Clifton together with some others developed the query flux system as part of MDDS, which produced solutions for mining large amounts of data stored in databases. Also, Mr. Sergey Brin, the co-founder of Google, was part of Prof. Ullman's research group at that time. I remember visiting Stanford with Dr. Rick Steinheiser from the intelligence community periodically, and Mr. Brin would rush in on rollerblades, give his presentation and rush out. During our last visit to Stanford in September 1998, Mr. Brin demonstrated to us his search engine, which I believe became Google soon after. There are also several inaccuracies in Dr. Ahmed's article dated January 22, 2015. For example, the MDDS program was not a sensitive program, as stated by Dr. Ahmed. It was an unclassified program that funded universities in the US. Furthermore, Sergey Brin never reported to me or to Dr. Rick Steinheiser. He only gave presentations to us during our visits to the Department of Computer Science at Stanford during the 1990s. Also, MDDS never funded Google, it funded Stanford University. Here, there is no substantive factual difference in Thrasingham's accounts, other than to assert that her statement associating Sergey Brin with the development of query flux is mistaken. Notably, this acknowledgement is derived not from her own knowledge, but from this very article quoting a comment from a Google spokesperson. However, the bizarre attempt to disassociate Google from the MDDS program misses the mark. Firstly, the MDDS never funded Google, because during the development of the core components of the Google search engine, there was no company incorporated with that name. The grant was instead provided to Stanford University through Prof. Ullman, through whom some MDDS funding was used to support Brin, who was co-developing Google at the time. Secondly, Thrasingham then adds that Brin never reported to her or the CIA Steinheiser, but admits he gave presentations to us during our visits to the Department of Computer Science at Stanford during the 1990s. It is unclear, though, what the distinction is here between reporting and delivering a detailed presentation. Either way, Thrasingham confirms that she and the CIA had taken a keen interest in Brin's development of Google. Thirdly, Thrasingham describes the MDDS program as unclassified. But this does not contradict its sensitive nature. As someone who has worked for decades as an intelligence contractor and advisor, Thrasingham is surely aware that there are many ways of categorizing intelligence, including sensitive but unclassified. A number of former US intelligence officials I spoke to said that the almost total lack of public information on the CIA and NSA's MDDS initiatives suggests that although the program was not classified, it is likely instead that its contents was considered sensitive, which would explain efforts to minimize transparency about the program and the way it fed back into developing tools for the US intelligence community. Fourthly, and finally, it is important to point out that the MDDS abstract, which Thrasingham includes in her University of Texas document, states clearly not only that the Director of Central Intelligence SCMS, CIA and NSA were the overseers of the MDDS initiative, but that the intended customers of the project were DoD, IC, and other government organizations, the Pentagon, the US intelligence community, and other relevant US government agencies. In other words, the provision of MDDS funding to Brin through Ullman, under the oversight of Thrasingham and Steinheiser, was fundamentally because they recognized the potential utility of Brin's work developing Google to the Pentagon, intelligence community, and the federal government at large. The MDDS program is actually referenced in several papers co-authored by Brin and Page while at Stanford, specifically highlighting its role in financially sponsoring Brin in the development of Google. In their 1998 paper published in the Bulletin of the IEEE Computer Society Technical Committee on Data Engineering, they described the automation of methods to extract information from the web via dual iterative pattern relation extraction. The development of a global ranking of web pages called PageRank. and the use of PageRank to develop a novel search engine called Google? Through an opening footnote, Sergey Brin confirms he was partially supported by the Community Management Staff's Massive Digital Data Systems Program, NSF grant IRIL 96,31,952, confirming that Brin's work developing Google was indeed partly funded by the SIA NSA-MDDS program. This NSF grant, identified alongside the MDDS, whose project report lists Brin among the students supported without mentioning the MDDS, was different to the NSF grant Larry Page, that included funding from DARPA and NASA. The project report, authored by Brin's supervisor Prof. Ullman, goes on to say under the section Indications of Success that there are some new stories of startups based on NSF-supported research. Under Project Impact, the report remarks, finally, the Google project has also gone commercial as Google.com. Therasingham's account, including her new amended version, therefore demonstrates that the SIA NSA-MDDS program was not only partly funding Brin throughout his work with Larry Page developing Google, but that senior US intelligence representatives, including a SIA official, oversaw the evolution of Google in this pre-launch phase, all the way until the company was ready to be officially founded. Google, then, had been enabled with a significant amount of seed funding and oversight from the Pentagon, namely, the SIA, NSA, and DARPA. The duty could not be reached for comment. When I asked Prof. Ullman to confirm whether or not Brin was partly funded under the Intelligence Community's MDDS program, and whether Ullman was aware that Brin was regularly briefing the SIA Steinheiser on his progress in developing the Google search engine, Ullman's responses were evasive. May I know whom you represent, and why you are interested in these issues? Who are your sources? He also denied that Brin played a significant role in developing the query flux system, although it is clear from Brin's papers that he did draw on that work in co-developing the PageRank system with Page. When I asked Ullman whether he was denying the US intelligence community's role in supporting Brin during the development of Google, he said, "I am not going to dignify this nonsense with a denial. If you want to explain what your theory is, and what point you are trying to make, I am not going to help you in the slightest." The MDDS abstract published online at the University of Texas confirms that the rationale for the SIA NSA project was to provide seed money to develop data management technologies, which are of high risk and high payoff, including techniques for querying, browsing, and filtering, transaction processing, accesses methods and indexing, metadata management and data modeling, and integrating heterogeneous databases, as well as developing appropriate architectures. The ultimate vision of the program was to provide for the seamless access and fusion of massive amounts of data, information and knowledge in a heterogeneous, real-time environment for use by the Pentagon, intelligence community and potentially across government. These revelations corroborate the claims of Robert Steele, former senior SIA officer and a founding civilian deputy director of the Marine Corps Intelligence Activity, whom I interviewed for The Guardian last year on open source intelligence. Citing sources at the SIA, Steele had said in 2006 that Steinheiser, an old colleague of his, was the SIA's main liaison at Google, and had arranged early funding for the pioneering IT firm. At the time, Wired founder John Battelle managed to get this official denial from a Google spokesperson in response to Steele's assertions. The statements related to Google are completely untrue. This time round, despite multiple requests and conversations, a Google spokesperson declined to comment. Update: as of 5:41 p.m. GMT 22 January 2015, Google's Director of Corporate Communication got in touch and asked me to include the following statement. Sergey Brin was not part of the Query Flux program at Stanford, nor were any of his projects funded by US intelligence bodies. This is what I wrote back. My response to that statement would be as follows. Brin himself in his own paper acknowledges funding from the community management staff of the Massive Digital Data Systems MDDS initiative, which was supplied through the NSF. The MDDS was an intelligence community program set up by the CIA and NSA. I also have it on record, as noted in the piece, from Prof. Thrasingham of University of Texas, that she managed the MDDS program on behalf of the US intelligence community, and that her and the CIA's Rick Steinheiser met Brin every 3 months or so for 2 years, to be briefed on his progress developing Google and PageRank. Whether Brin worked on query flocks or not is neither here nor there. In that context, you might want to consider the following questions. 1. Does Google deny that Brin's work was part funded by the MDDS via an NSF grant? 2. Does Google deny that Brin reported regularly to Thrasingham and Steinheiser from around 1996 to 1998 until September, that year, when he presented the Google search engine to them? Total Information Awareness. A call for papers for the MDDS was sent out via email list on November 3, 1993 from senior US intelligence official David Charvania, Director of the Research and Development Coordination Office of the Intelligence Community SCMS. The reaction from Tatu Ilonen, celebrated inventor of the widely used Secure Shell SSH data protection protocol, to his colleagues on the email list is telling. Crypto relevance? Makes you think whether you should protect your data? The email also confirms that defense contractor and Highlands Forum partner, SAIC, was managing the MDDS submission process, with abstracts to be sent to Jackie Booth of the CIA's Office of Research and Development via SAIC email address. By 1997, Thrasingham reveals, shortly before Google became incorporated, and while she was still overseeing the development of its search engine software at Stanford, her thoughts turned to the national security applications of the MDDS program. In the acknowledgments to her book, Web Data Mining and Applications in Business Intelligence and Counterterrorism 2003, Thrasingham writes that she and Dr. Rick Steinheiser of the CIA began discussions with Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency on applying data mining for counterterrorism. An idea that resulted directly from the MDDS program, which partly funded Google. These discussions eventually developed into the current EELD Evidence Extraction and Link Detection Program at DARPA. So the very same senior CIA official and CIA NSA contractor involved in providing the seed funding for Google were simultaneously contemplating the role of data mining for counterterrorism purposes, and were developing ideas for tools actually advanced by DARPA. Today, as illustrated by her recent opt in the New York Times, Thrasingham remains a staunch advocate of data mining for counterterrorism purposes, but also insists that these methods must be developed by government in cooperation with civil liberties lawyers and privacy advocates to ensure that robust procedures are in place to prevent potential abuse. She points out, damningly, that with the quantity of information being collected, there is a high risk of false positives. In 1993, when the MDDS program was launched and managed by Mitri Corporation on behalf of the US intelligence community, University of Virginia computer science Dr. Anita K. Jones, a Mitri trustee, landed the job of DARPA director and head of research and engineering across the Pentagon. She had been on the board of Mitri since 1988. From 1987 to 1993, Jones simultaneously served on SAIC's board of directors. As the new head of DARPA from 1993 to 1997, she also co-chaired the Pentagon's Highlands Forum during the period of Google's pre-launch development at Stanford under the MDSS. Thus, when Thrasingham and Steinheiser were talking to DARPA about the counterterrorism applications of MDDS research, Jones was DARPA director and Highlands Forum co-chair. That year, Jones left DARPA to return to her post at the University of Virginia. The following year, she joined the board of the National Science Foundation, which of course had also just funded Brin and Page, and also returned to the board of SAIC. When she left duty, Senator Chuck Rob paid Jones the following tribute. She brought the technology and operational military communities together to design detailed plans to sustain US dominance on the battlefield into the next century. On the board of the National Science Foundation from 1992 to 1998, including a stint as chairman from 1996, was Richard N. Zur. This was the period in which the NSF sponsored Sergey Brin and Larry Page in association with DARPA. In June 1994, Prof. Zur, a chemist at Stanford, participated with Prof. Jeffrey Ullman, who supervised Sergey Brin's research, on a panel sponsored by Stanford and the National Research Council discussing the need for scientists to show how their work ties to national needs. The panel brought together scientists and policymakers, including Washington insiders, DARPA SEELD program, inspired by the work of Thrasingham and Steinheiser under Jones. Watch was rapidly adapted and integrated with a suite of tools to conduct comprehensive surveillance under the Bush administration. According to DARPA official Ted Senator, who led the EELD program for the agency's short-lived Information Awareness Office, EELD was among a range of promising techniques being prepared for integration into the prototype TIAS system. TIAS stood for Total Information Awareness, and was the main global electronic eavesdropping and data mining program deployed by the Bush administration after 9/11. TIA had been set up by Iran-Contra conspirator Admiral John Poindexter, who was appointed in 2002 by Bush to lead DARPA's new Information Awareness Office. The Xerox Palo Alto Research Center Park was another contractor among 26 companies, also including SAIC, that received million-dollar contracts from DARPA. The specific quantities remained classified under Poindexter, to push forward the TIAS surveillance program in 2002 onwards. The research included behavior-based profiling, automated detection, identification and tracking of terrorist activity, among other data analyzing projects. At this time, Park's director and chief science was Dan Seeley Brown. Both Brown and Poindexter were Pentagon Highlands Forum participants. Brown on a regular basis until recently. TIA was purportedly shut down in 2003, due to public opposition after the program was exposed in the media, but the following year Poindexter participated in a Pentagon Highlands group session in Singapore, alongside defense and security officials from around the world. Meanwhile, Ted Senator continued to manage the EELD program among other data mining and analysis projects at DARPA until 2006, when he left to become a vice president at SAIC. He is now a SAIC Leidos Technical Fellow. Google, DARPA and the money trail. Long before the appearance of Sergey Brin and Larry Page, Stanford University's computer science department had a close working relationship with US military intelligence. A letter dated November 5, 1984 from the Office of Renowned Artificial Intelligence expert, Prof. Edward Feigenbaum, addressed to Rick Steinheiser, gives the latter directions to Stanford's heuristic programming project, addressing Steinheiser as a member of the I Steering Committee. A list of attendees at a contractor conference around that time, sponsored by the Pentagon's Office of Naval Research (ONR), includes Steinheiser as a delegate under the designation OPNAV Op 115, which refers to the Office of the Chief of Naval Operations. Program on Operational Readiness, which played a major role in advancing digital systems for the military. From the 1970s, Prof. Feigenbaum and his colleagues had been running Stanford's heuristic programming project under contract with DARPA, continuing through to the 1990s. Feigenbaum alone had received around over $7 million in this period for his work from DARPA, along with other funding from the NSF, NASA, and ONR. Brin's supervisor at Stanford, Prof. Jeffrey Ullman, was a 1996 part of a joint funding project of DARPA's Intelligent Integration of Information program. That year, Ullman co-chaired DARPA-sponsored meetings on data exchange between multiple systems. In September 1998, the same month that Sergey Brin briefed us, intelligence representatives Steinheiser and Thrasingham, tech entrepreneurs Andreas Bechtolsheim and David Churton invested $100,000 each in Google. Both investors were connected to DARPA. As a Stanford PhD student in electrical engineering in the 1980s, Bechtolsheim's pioneering Sunday Workstation project had been funded by DARPA and the Stanford Computer Science Department. This research was the foundation of Bechtolsheim's establishment of Sunday Microsystems, which he co-founded with William Joy. As for Bechtolsheim's co-investor in Google, David Churton, the latter is a longtime Stanford computer science professor, who has an even more entrenched relationship with DARPA. His bio at the University of Alberta, which in November 2014 awarded him an honorary science doctorate, says that Churton's research has received the support of the U.S. Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency DARPA for over 20 years. In the meantime, Bechtolsheim left Sunday Microsystems in 1995, co-founding Granite Systems with his fellow Google investor Churton as a partner. They sold Granite to Cisco Systems in 1996. Retaining significant ownership of Granite, and becoming senior Cisco executives. An email obtained from the Enron corpus, a database of 600,000 emails acquired by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and later released to the public from Richard O'Neill, inviting Enron executives to participate in the Highlands Forum, shows that Cisco and Granite executives are intimately connected to the Pentagon. The email reveals that in May 2000, Bechtolsheim's partner and Sunday Microsystems co-founder, William Joy, who was then chief scientist and corporate executive officer there, had attended the forum to discuss nanotechnology and molecular computing. In 1999, Joy had also co-chaired the President's Information Technology Advisory Committee, overseeing a report acknowledging that DARPA had revised its priorities in the 90s, so that all information technology funding was judged in terms of its benefit to the warfighter. Throughout the 1990s, then, DARPA's funding to Stanford, including Google, was explicitly about developing technologies that could augment the Pentagon's military intelligence operations in war theaters. The Joy Report recommended more federal government funding from the Pentagon, NASA, and other agencies to the ed sector. Greg Papadopoulos, another of Bechtolsheim's colleagues, as then Sunday Microsystems Chief Technology Officer, also attended a Pentagon Highlands Forum meeting in September 2000. In November, the Pentagon Highlands Forum hosted Sue Bostrom, who was vice president for the Internet at Cisco, sitting on the company's board alongside Google co-investors Bechtolsheim and Churton. The forum also hosted Lawrence Zurif, then a managing partner of Granite, which Bechtolsheim and Churton had sold to Cisco. Zurif had previously been an SAIC contractor from 1993 to 1994, working with the Pentagon on national security issues, specifically for Marshall's Office of Net Assessment. In 1994, both the SAIC and the ANA were, of course, involved in co-establishing the Pentagon Highlands Forum. Among Zurif's output during his SAIC tenure was a paper titled Understanding Information War, delivered at a SAIC-sponsored Army Roundtable on the Revolution in Military Affairs. After Google's incorporation, the company received $25 million in equity funding in 1999 led by Sequoia Capital and Kleiner Perkins Cofield and Byers. According to Homeland Security Today, a number of Sequoia-bankrolled startups have contracted with the Department of Defense, especially after 9/11, when Sequoia's Mark Hovam met with Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld to discuss the application of emerging technologies to warfighting and intelligence collection. Similarly, Kleiner Perkins had developed a close relationship with In-Q-Tel, the SIA venture capitalist firm that funds startups to advance priority technologies of value to the intelligence community. John Doerr, who led the Kleiner-Perkins investment in Google obtaining a board position, was a major early investor in Beckle's Sunday Microsystems at its launch. He and his wife Anna are the main funders behind Rice University's Center for Engineering Leadership RCEL, which in 2009 received $16 million from DARPA for its platform-aware compilation environment-based ubiquitous computing R&D program. Doerr also has a close relationship with the Obama administration, which he advised shortly after it took power, to ramp up Pentagon funding to the tech industry. In 2013, at the Fortune Brainstorm Tech Conference, Doerr applauded how the DoD's DARPA-funded GPS, CAD, most of the major computer science departments, and of course, the Internet. From inception, in other words, Google was incubated, nurtured and financed by interests that were directly affiliated or closely aligned with the U.S. military intelligence community, many of whom were embedded in the Pentagon Highlands Forum. Google captures the Pentagon in 2003. Google began customizing its search engine under special contract with the CIA for its Interlink Management Office, overseeing top secret and sensitive but unclassified intranets for CIA and other IC agencies. According to Homeland Security Today, that year, CIA funding was also being quietly funneled through the National Science Foundation to projects that might help create new capabilities to combat terrorism through advanced technology. The following year, Google bought the firm Keyhole, which had originally been funded by In-Q-Tel. Using Keyhole, Google began developing the advanced satellite mapping software behind Google Earth. Former DARPA director and Highlands Forum co-chair Anita Jones had been on the board of In-Q-Tel at this time, and remains so today. Then in November 2005, In-Q-Tel issued notices to sell $2.2 million of Google stocks. Google's relationship with US intelligence was further brought to light when a contractor told a closed Washington, D.C. conference of intelligence professionals on a not-for-attribution basis that at least one US intelligence agency was working to leverage Google's user data monitoring capability as part of an effort to acquire data of national security intelligence interest. A photo on Flickr dated March 2007 reveals that Google research director and AI expert Peter Norvig attended a Pentagon Highlands Forum meeting that year in Carmel, California. Norvig's intimate connection to the forum, as of that year, is also corroborated by his role in guest editing the 2007 forum reading list. The photo below shows Norvig in conversation with Louis Shepard, who at that time was Senior Technology Officer at the Defense Intelligence Agency, responsible for investigating, approving, and architecting all new hardware, software systems and acquisitions for the global defense intelligence enterprise, including big data technologies. Shepard now works at Microsoft. Norvig was a computer research scientist at Stanford University in 1991 before joining Beckle's Sunday Microsystems as senior scientist until 1994, and going on to head up NASA's Computer Science Division. Norvig shows up on O'Neill's Google Plus profile as one of his close connections. Scoping the rest of O'Neill's Google Plus connections illustrates that he is directly connected not just to a wide range of Google executives, but also to some of the biggest names in the US tech community. Those connections include Michelle Westlander-Quaid, an ex-CIA contractor and former senior Pentagon intelligence official, who is now Google's Chief Technology Officer, where she is developing programs to best fit government agencies' needs. Elizabeth Churchill, Google Director of User Experience, James Kuffner, a humanoid robotics expert who now heads up Google's robotics division, and who introduced the term cloud robotics, Mark Drapeau, Director of Innovation Engagement for Microsoft's public sector business, Lily Ching, General Manager of Microsoft's Future Social Experiences Fuse Labs, John Nuttall, Microsoft Evangelist, Corey Ondrijka, Vice President of Engineering at Facebook, to name just a few. In 2010, Google signed a multi-billion-dollar no-bid contract with the NSA's sister agency, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency (NGA). The contract was to use Google Earth for visualization services for the NGA. Google had developed the software behind Google Earth by purchasing Keyhole from the SIA venture firm in QTEL. Then a year after, in 2011, another of O'Neill's Google Plus connections, Michelle Quaid, who had served in executive positions at the NGA, National Reconnaissance Office and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, left her government role to become Google Innovation Evangelist and the point person for seeking government contracts. Quaid's last role before her move to Google was as a senior representative of the Director of National Intelligence to the Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance Task Force, and a senior advisor to the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence's Director of Joint and Coalition Warfighter Support (JNCWS). Both roles involved information operations at their core. Before her Google move, in other words, Quaid worked closely with the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, to which the Pentagon's Highlands Forum is subordinate. Quaid has herself attended the forum, though precisely when and how often I could not confirm. In March 2012, then DARPA Director Regina Duggan, who in that capacity was also co-chair of the Pentagon Highlands Forum, followed her colleague Quaid into Google to lead the company's new Advanced Technology and Projects Group. During her Pentagon tenure, Duggan led on strategic cybersecurity and social media, among other initiatives. She was responsible for focusing an increasing portion of DARPA's work on the investigation of offensive capabilities to address military-specific needs, securing $500 million of government funding for DARPA cyber research from 2012 to 2017. By November 2014, Google's chief AI and robotics expert James Kuffner was a delegate alongside O'Neill at the Highlands Island Forum 2014 in Singapore, to explore advancement in robotics and artificial intelligence, implications for society, security and conflict. The event included 26 delegates from Austria, Israel, Japan, Singapore, Sweden, Britain and the US, from both were industry and government. Kuffner's association with the Pentagon, however, began much earlier. In 1997, Kuffner was a researcher during his Stanford PhD for a Pentagon-funded project on networked autonomous mobile robots, sponsored by DARPA and the US Navy. Rumsfeld and persistent surveillance. In sum, many of Google's most senior executives are affiliated with the Pentagon Highlands Forum, which throughout the period of Google's growth over the last decade, has surfaced repeatedly as a connecting and convening force. The US intelligence community's incubation of Google from inception occurred through a combination of direct sponsorship and informal networks of financial influence, themselves closely aligned with Pentagon interests. The Highlands Forum itself has used the informal relationship building of such private networks to bring together defense and industry sectors, enabling the fusion of corporate and military interests, in expanding the covert surveillance apparatus in the name of national security. The power wielded by the shadow network represented in the forum can, however, be gauged most clearly from its impact during the Bush administration, when it played a direct role in literally writing the strategies and doctrines behind its efforts to achieve information superiority. In December 2001, O'Neill confirmed that strategic discussions at the Highlands Forum were feeding directly into Andrew Marshall's duty-wide strategic review ordered by President Bush and Donald Rumsfeld, to upgrade the military, including the Quadrennial Defense Review, and that some of the earliest forum meetings resulted in the writing of a group of duty policies, strategies, and doctrine for the services on information warfare. That process of writing the Pentagon's information warfare policies was done in conjunction with people who understood the environment differently, not only as citizens, but also foreign citizens, and people who were developing corporate net. The Pentagon's post 9/11 information warfare doctrines were, then, written not just by national security officials from the US and abroad, but also by powerful corporate entities in the defense and technology sectors. In April that year, General James McCarthy had completed his Defense Transformation Review ordered by Rumsfeld. His report repeatedly highlighted mass surveillance as integral to DoD transformation. As for Marshall, his follow-up report for Rumsfeld was going to develop a blueprint determining the Pentagon's future in the information age. O'Neill also affirmed that to develop information warfare doctrine, the forum had held extensive discussions on electronic surveillance and what constitutes an act of war in an information environment. Papers feeding into U.S. defense policy written through the late 1990s by RAND consultants John Arquilla and David Ronfelt, both long-standing Highlands Forum members, were produced as a result of those meetings. Exploring policy dilemmas on how far to take the goal of information superiority. One of the things that was shocking to the American public was that we weren't pilfering Milosevic's accounts electronically when we in fact could, commented O'Neill. Although the R&D process around the Pentagon transformation strategy remains classified, a hint at the DoD discussions going on in this period can be gleaned from a 2005 U.S. Army School of Advanced Military Studies research monograph in the DoD journal, Military Review, authored by an active Army intelligence officer. The idea of persistent surveillance as a transformational capability has circulated within the national intelligence community and the Department of Defense DoD for at least 3 years. The paper said, referencing the Rumsfeld Commission transformation study. The Army paper went on to review a range of high-level official military documents, including one from the Office of the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, showing that persistent surveillance was a fundamental theme of the information-centric vision for defense policy across the Pentagon. We now know that just 2 months before O'Neill's address at Harvard in 2001, under the TIA program, President Bush had secretly authorized the NSA's domestic surveillance of Americans without court-approved warrants, in what appears to have been an illegal modification of the Thin Thread data mining project, as later exposed by NSA whistleblowers William Binney and Thomas Drake. The surveillance startup Nexus from here on, Highlands Forum partner SAIC played a key role in the NSA rollout from inception. Shortly after 9/11, Brian Sharkey, Chief Technology Officer of SAIC's L3 sector focusing on its systems for emergency responders, teamed up with John Poindexter to propose the TIA surveillance program. SAIC's Sharkey had previously been Deputy Director of the Information Systems Office at DARPA through the 1990s. Meanwhile, around the same time, SAIC Vice President for Corporate Development, Samuel Vuner, became head of the NSA's Signals Intelligence Programs. SAIC was then among a consortium receiving a $280 million contract to develop one of the NSA's secret eavesdropping systems. By 2003, Vuner returned to SAIC to become Director of Strategic Planning and Business Development of the firm's intelligence group. That year, the NSA consolidated its TIA program of warrantless electronic surveillance to keep track of individuals and understand how they fit into models through risk profiles of American citizens and foreigners. TIA was doing this by integrating databases on finance, travel, medical, educational and other records into a virtual, centralized grand database. This was also the year that the Bush administration drew up its notorious Information Operations Roadmap, describing the Internet as a vulnerable weapons system. Rumsfeld's IO roadmap had advocated that Pentagon's